Hi, welcome to New America. My name is Mark Schmidt. I'm the director of the Political Reform Program at New America. Our program was focused on new ideas to rethink and reshape the way democracy works in the United States. And for a number of years, we focused on basically on traditional political and electoral institutions, Congress, structure of elections, and then more innovative ideas like what we could do with citizen assemblies and things like that. But a really important aspect of American democracy is thinking about those institutions that are not explicitly political or governmental, but that are where people connect both with each other and with the kind of ideas and information that they need to be engaged citizens. And one of those that we tend to take for granted, although I think in the current moment we may be learning the hard way not to take it for granted, is libraries. And really, it, we're really beginning to understand what an important civic center they are, the role they play in family life, the way they can play in anchoring a community. Their prevalence in every kind of community. We talk sometimes about the information deserts or areas that don't have a lot of other connectivity. There's always libraries. There's always a way to connect those, at least until there aren't. So we're really thrilled to host a discussion today with Shamichael Hallman, who's the Director of Civic Health and Economic Opportunity at the Urban Libraries Council and the author of a new book called Meet Me at the Library. Shamichael's been engaged in a lot of civic efforts that center on libraries, and the book will talk about some of those, and he'll talk about some of those. And he'll be in conversation with Kimberlyn Leary, who is a senior fellow at New America, based in our program, but also an advisor to New America Leadership because she's bringing in enormous experience and insight from her work in government at Harvard. She's a psychotherapist and also has been a executive vice president at the Urban Institute. She'll be a she'll be going back to Harvard later in the year or next year. But we're really pleased to have her as part of this conversation now. And she has an enormous range of interest and insight. So she'll draw out some of Shamichael's points, and we're thrilled to have her. And then closing out the conversation will be Holly Rusin-Gilman, my colleague, who's also a senior fellow, really leads our work on civic engagement, citizen assemblies, co-governance, and I think we're in a great position to put all this in the real context of democracy and civic health. So I will turn it over to you, Kim.
Thank you. Thank
Or
you,
to
Mark.
Shamichael. I'm not actually sure who I'm supposed to turn it over to. But.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Holly, and thank you, New America, and welcome, everyone. You know, I've spent my career at the intersection of public trust, as Mark mentioned, also mental health and institutional change. And just last week, I returned from the Milken Global Conference, where I was struck by a through line that I think is so relevant to Shamichael's work. You know, everywhere there was a sense that innovation is just in play, but trust remains very scarce. And it's clear that people are searching not just for new ideas, but they're also searching for spaces that can hold complexity, that can enable belonging, and help us to rebuild what many people find to be fraying and that which is under threat. So I'd like to just engage you, Shamichael, and to thank you for this terrific book, Meet Me at the Library. And let me just start by saying, you know, your book opens with a conversation about people feeling very isolated. Maybe they don't always call it loneliness the way the former Surgeon General Vivek Murthy did, but I'd love to just get your take on why do you think people are so isolated and disconnected now? In theory, we can connect with everyone across the globe, but we still seem to be so lonely.
Yeah, it's quite ironic, actually, isn't it, Kimberlyn? And first off, I want to say thank you for this conversation and thank you to the folks in New America. As I think about this question, the answer for me really cuts across multiple levels: individual, relational, community, and then societal. But I really placed most of my focus on the community and societal factors because I think that's where we have some real potential for structural solutions. At the community level, I think we have to really acknowledge that the built environment often works against connection. It sort of promotes aloneness in some way. The way that our neighborhoods are designed, sprawling neighborhoods with no sidewalks, public transportation that doesn't link across class or racial lines, a lack of third spaces. All of that, I think, compounds isolation. It's hard to connect with others when there's really literally nowhere to do it, right? And even when we do have places like libraries or parks, if we don't ensure equitable access, if those spaces aren't open at the right times, if they're not staffed appropriately, or if they're not located in historically underserved neighborhoods, then we sort of reinforce disconnection, loneliness. That's why I think it's so important to talk about the role of public libraries as critical civic and social infrastructure. These really are the places where relationships are sparked, where belonging begins. Um, but I think that's kind of just only one component. The second level is at the it's societal level. We're sort of experiencing a form of fracture right now, one that really shows a deep level of division in our country that makes it incredibly hard to connect across difference because we're not sort of working from the sort of same basic set of assumptions. And so when you combine that communal level of not necessarily having opportunities to connect, but then even when we get in opportunities to have to connect with each other, when we don't necessarily lack the skills, don't have the skills to connect with each other, it kind of compounds where we are in terms of the isolation and the loneliness that we're experiencing right now.
Let me pick up on that, especially your comment that libraries are third spaces. In your book, you beautifully describe libraries as places where people can be both alone and together. What is it about the built environment or even the idea of libraries or both that could help reduce the kind of isolation and create the kind of bridging that you're talking about?
Yeah, I think there is something so special about walking in the library. It feels different, right? No one is checking your bank account. No one is asking you if you belong. It's just one of the few places where you can just be. You don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to meet some sort of requirements to access the building. You can just show up. And what makes libraries special certainly are the array of services and books that are offered. But I think even more than that, they're places where people from all walks of life can come together in a shared space. You might come to use a computer, to join a book club, to even just sit in quiet. And in that space, you're surrounded by others who are doing the same, each with their own story. And that quiet togetherness really creates something powerful that I've experienced time and time again, working in libraries and also writing about libraries. They meet different needs all at once. If you need solitude, you can find it. If you need community, you can find that too. And that balance, I think, is very rare in any sort of space. And for people who are struggling, whether it's with housing or employment or caregiving, or simply trying to find a sense of purpose, the library really becomes a steady place in the middle of all of that uncertainty. And I think it's very important for us to recognize that another place where libraries stand out is trust, right? That like, it still are one of the most trusted institutions. They've earned it, not by being flashy or political, but by consistently showing up for people. They protect your privacy, they center your access. At least I can say from my vantage point, every library that I've gone in has been staffed by people who are, very helpful. They're trained to really help people without judgment. And so when people ask me what reduces isolation, I think about places that really help people feel seen without putting people on the spot. And I think libraries do that perhaps better than any other public space, indoor public space that we have.
I love that the way you are describing the library as both a space and a function that can serve multiple needs for individuals in the community all at once. Now, as your book progresses, and it's really a terrific read, I hope people do take advantage of the opportunity to get the book and to go through it. As your book progresses, you build towards a kind of an ambition, a vision of libraries that can help the public and communities reimagine themselves. So,
Mhm.
what are the ingredients in order for that imagination to take root? Especially, let me be frank, in communities that are under-resourced and in communities, so many of them, that are politically divided.
Yeah, well, I think this comes down to those ingredients really start with, again, the library as a place, right? That it is a space where you can just show up, where you can just be. And that when you walk into that space, there's a welcoming face that is there. And then there are, you know, I used to talk a lot about when I first came into the world of libraries, that libraries are more than books. And it's like the thing that I needed to be able to say because it's all that I knew about the library project that I was a part of in Memphis. You know, we were adding co-working spaces, we were adding recording studios, and these things made for really amazing shared experiences, right? That people, regardless of where they fell along the ideological spectrum, political spectrum, could do things together, and that was a very, very powerful thing. But then, sort of as I moved from, sort of as I got more understanding about the role of public libraries, I shifted that thought from the library is more than books to a different phrase that was the library is books and more. I think that was very important to center the foundational work of libraries in providing free and open access to knowledge and information. And when you think about walking into a library, thinking about any particular topic that you might be interested in, seeing a diverse range of thoughts about that written by a diverse range of authors from different perspectives, that it really opens up and gives you at least the potential anyway to be able to engage not only across socioeconomic difference, but also across political and ideological difference.
Mhm. You know, one of the stories that you tell in your book is about this library of things where people can
Mm.
check out, you know, everything from a camera to, and this has stayed with me, a carpet cleaner and or carpet sweeper. I can't remember the exact detail, but tell us a little bit more about that. It's not the traditional way we think of developing capabilities, but the story you tell is what it means to a family to be able to actually have access to a device that will enable their home to be as welcoming for them and their neighbors as possible.
Yeah, you know, and I think when you, as you said, sometimes when we think about that, we say, well, hey man, like it's not that's not the library that I'm used to. That's not that's like where are the books, right? But the thing that I really love about this growing library of things is that it is still at the very heart of what libraries are about, and that is about access. You know, what is exciting about libraries right now is I think how responsive they have become. And one of the things that I talk about in the book that I try to tell people a lot is that the library has always been an ever evolving institution. It's always looking for ways to meet the needs of the community. And so in that way, I think libraries are amongst the most innovative institutions that we have. And innovation, I think, doesn't necessarily mean chasing trends. It means, you know, listening closely to the community and responding in ways that are creative and meaningful and inclusive. You know, as we talk about that idea of the library of things, I go back to my time in Memphis with the Memphis Public Library System. And one of the things that we were learning about, particularly folks who we were not engaged and folks who were not coming into the library as much as, you know, we would like them to, was that many of these folks were creative entrepreneurs, and you know they were making soaps and jewelries and apparel. And as we talked with those folks to try to understand what they were needing and what they wanted access to, we discovered a range of things like recording equipment, like cameras, like creative software that was necessarily out of reach for them, right? And so what we were able to do from a library perspective was to say, hey, we can use the resources that we have to be able to provide the access that you need to be able to live your life, to be able to produce, to be able to create, to be able to go and build your business.
So, knowledge is transferred in multiple ways, through books, through recordings, but also through things. I think that's what and by doing. And sometimes, in order to really develop those capabilities, you have to be able to engage and do. So that brings me to my local public library. I live in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I know you spent some time here in Cambridge and at Harvard. So I'd like to ask you a little bit about what stands out about the Cambridge Public Library. Just have to give a shout out to my home community. And
For
what
sure.
lessons can other libraries take from what the Cambridge Public Library is doing?
Yeah, you know, Cambridge Public Library really stayed with me. I found myself working there and sometimes just hanging, not necessarily working, just hanging there. And it's such a special place, you know, partly because of what it offers. You know, there's all these really great amenities, resources there, but mostly I think because of how it feels when you're there. There's an intentionality behind every element of that space, you know, from the programming to the physical layout. It's designed to invite people and to make them stay. And that really starts with leadership. right? When you look at the library director there, Dr. Maria McCauley, the director of libraries in Cambridge, she really sets the tone. Under her leadership, that system has expanded branch hours. They have removed library fines. They've introduced STEAM programming. Even opened a net zero branch. That's beautiful. I mean, like if you haven't gone to that branch, you've got to check it out. Um, but then, sort of beyond the physical, like these things that you can touch, the books and the laptops and all these things. There's the physical space, and I just want to sort of paint a picture that when you go to the main library there, Cambridge Public Library, the one that's right adjacent to the Harvard campus, there's a courtyard there that is just beautiful. And Kimberly, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That courtyard is not just a it's not just a courtyard. It's really an outdoor extension of the library. There are benches that are there under shade trees. There's open lawns. There's a dog park. There's a tennis courts nearby. And that sort of intentional green space is the library as well. And it does a lot of quiet work to bring and ensure that a variety of people enter that space.
Mhm. That's true, and it's near the high school, or one of the high
Yeah,
schools as well. So there's a lot of young people and older folks who are in sharing that space on any given day. But
yeah,
these kind of experiences, they depend on resources, don't they? And you make that point throughout your book. So what's the playbook for communities? And, we think of Massachusetts and we think of Boston, but there's also the western part of the state, which is quite rural, or rural Alabama or rural Louisiana, where my family is from. Can you say a little bit more about how that leadership and those features can be brought to any library, but also address the resource question? Because I know that's going to be on the minds of many communities.
sure. Yeah, I think as I have traveled and visited some of the smallest libraries in this country, I think the secret ingredient there really is sticking to the basics, right? One library that really stood out to me was the James Poole Library in Utah, Alabama, down in the Black Belt region. It serves fewer than 3,000 people, but it is a hub, right? And I was just sort of looking as I was prepping uh, uh, for this call. A hurricane, very very bad hurricane, came through that part of the region earlier this year, and the library was one of the first stops for the Red Cross. That kind of responsiveness is deeply rooted in the trust that the library's built over time. And it's really, great to sort of think about, well, the library is that space. It is that space where people in the community know that they can go to get the help, to get the resources that they need. But it's not just the emergency response. It's also what happens day to day. One of the most impactful programs that I saw while I was there was a statewide program that was actually ran out of the library called Kids and Kin. It supports grandparents, aunts, and older siblings who are raising relatives' children. The library didn't create the program, but they made it accessible. But they hosted the gatherings, they provided welcoming space for people who often felt overlooked. I think that's the playbook, right? That it is certainly the library, particularly those small libraries, leveraging books, leveraging physical space, um, but also leaning into partnerships. And also, I think, particularly in a place like Utah, Alabama, we cannot forget that the digital divide is still a thing, and that there are still millions of Americans who do not have reliable high-speed internet access. And the library often is that place where they can go, and that is so crucial for filling government benefits and services, applying for jobs, and those sorts of things.
Mhm. In your book, you also have some wonderful images about pop-up libraries, which made
Mhm.
me think about how green space, whether it's adjacent to a library or even a couple blocks away, might still serve that same functionality in a broader range of communities. Let me ask you a tough question. Can I do that, Shamichael?
Sure.
Okay. So I teach at the Bloomberg Center for Cities, and we teach a case that's written by my colleague Mark Moore, and it's called Nobody's Core Business. It's set in a library where a librarian has to make certain decisions, and the case we teach in the context of developing public value. So here's the tension point in the case. The librarian has to decide if she will use some of her resources to purchase Narcan, to have it on hand in case a patron has an opioid overdose. And this immediately raises the big questions. You've said, and I believe, of course, as well, that libraries belong to all. But how do we help communities to live up to that ideal? especially at a time when we do see polarization and wanting to distance ourselves sometimes from our fellow community members.
Yeah. Wow. You said you were going to ask a hard question. That was, you did not disappoint, Kimberly. Well, let's maybe start with the issue of Narcan, right? And there was a really interesting op-ed that was written a couple of years ago by John Herron, who was the former library director at Kansas City Public Library. Well, he actually addressed this, and he talked about the increasing number of things that we are asking of librarians, the increasing number of responsibilities that we're laying at the feet of librarians, often who, you necessarily hop into library school to do this thing, to be administering Narcan. But libraries know that they often on the front lines. They're the places where many of these folks actually come, right? And so, what I really loved as John was writing that article is, and I think this will sort of vary based on library system, the library system, but that as John articulates, no, the librarian shouldn't be, doing that administration. That should be done by a skilled healthcare professional, right? That should be done by someone, who that's what they know to do. And the best way to facilitate that is by partnerships, by making sure that public libraries are partnering with healthcare providers, partnering with local hospitals, that sort of thing. And again, I know that is something that will that many libraries that are administering, that many libraries that are doing that work. But as I think about some of the libraries that I have visited, cities like Los Angeles and Seattle, I think where the real opportunity is to not only talk about partnerships, but to begin to ask ourselves how we might embed libraries into these conversations about mental health, about public health, right? That as we develop strategies, the library should be a part of that. Now, to get to your second question around just how divided we are, and is it even possible to bring people together? I say yes. As I'm, and I don't base this on theory. I base this on, again, what I have seen. There are some really great things that are happening right now. A number of really great organizations. I'll throw up, for instance, one called Living Room Conversations, because I know so many libraries are using living room conversations. It is a really wonderful model to take a particular topic, maybe a local issue, and bring people together to have conversation around it. Now, it's a lot of work because libraries have to do the work in making sure that there's a diverse group of people who actually show up. But when you put these ground rules in place, it's actually a beautiful thing that happens. There is even recent research right now that says that even with the polarization that we have, even as divided as we are, people still actually have a desire to connect across difference, to connect across these things. They often don't have the opportunities. They often don't have the skills, right? Particularly, I think the pandemic sort of amplified that, and of course, the national rhetoric amplifies that. But when given the opportunity, when given the space, and when given a couple of ground rules, people will actually have conversations about issues that, for the most part, stay on track. And again, I do want to talk, as I mentioned earlier, the power of shared experience. When moms are coming to a place for story time, when people are coming together to learn how to sew or knit or code or cook, in the Cambridge example there,
Right.
that does a tremendous amount of work in establishing a level of empathy and understanding of the other person.
Mhm. So it sounds like you feel that libraries are a venue potentially for being able to develop that shared, not just a shared space, but a shared civic space, a shared psychological space, and that empathy can help the library to be that source of reimagining and maybe re-encountering people and community members in different ways. Would that be fair to say, Shamichael?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So let me ask you a couple of other hard questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
So we also know that even as we're talking about open spaces in different ways, and your book is so clear about that, that many communities are facing rising book bans and
Mm.
even efforts to erase our shared history. And I'd like to know how libraries are responding to that, where they're a third space, but also in many instances subject to sort of local sentiments. What's a librarian to do in those contexts?
Yeah, it is a very challenging space for a number of libraries, across the country, different regions. I've seen libraries do a couple of things here. Uh, one of I think the most important things is to really engage in awareness raising in public education. Um, the idea that you should be able to go, again, as I said earlier, to go into the library and see a diversity of thought on any given topic is really core to this idea of intellectual freedom or freedom of inquiry. It's a core of a democratic society that we should be able to have these things. And the challenge is not to pull these books off the shelf. The challenge is to develop sort of critical thinking skills to allow people to engage with these different and various ideas. But of course, what we are seeing goes, uh, 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 what we're seeing in terms of the attacks is really going beyond it, right? They are, as you said, coordinated efforts to silence voices, to restrict diverse stories, to reshape how we understand ourselves as a country. And as I think about other things that libraries are doing, one of the programs that I'm seeing kind of a rise in right now is the book sanctuary, and that is where libraries are, commit to protecting challenged or banned titles. Some folks are creating permanent collections that include frequently targeted books, making them available on display, or even making them a part of sort of book clubs and events. Others are getting really creative with storytelling and public art. I've seen libraries curate exhibits on banned authors, host or history projects that sort of highlight underrepresented voices, and turn their walls and windows into canvases that really reflect the diversity of their community. And I think these efforts are really like declarations that say that all stories matter.
Mhm. So, you were talking earlier about partnerships and the tremendous potential that exists for libraries and library systems to be partners to other systems and other organizations. Of course, that too takes resources. Now, during the Obama and Biden administrations, I had the privilege of serving. We worked closely with entities like the Institute of Museum and Library Sciences, and that agency has now almost been dismantled by the current administration, and it's lost a good deal, maybe all of its federal funding. So what's at stake for all of us across the nation when an institution like the Institute of Museum and Library Sciences faces the kind of challenges it's facing? And what's the strongest possible case that you or we can make for continued support?
Wow. Well, again, I have worked in libraries for years. I led a multi-million dollar renovation. I've traveled libraries across the country and talking with staff and even residents of communities. I can tell you when we talk about cuts to IMLS or even beyond that with the NEH or the EA, we're not just talking about numbers on a budget. We're talking about people. We're talking about communities. We're talking about months of trust, years of trust, and about opportunities. Libraries really are one of the last civic spaces where democracy happens in real life. Not in a textbook, but at a table, in a workshop, in a conversation. And IMLS plays a huge part in making that possible. It supports workforce development, broadband access, early literacy, STEM learning, civic programming, you name it. And that support reaches, I think, every congressional district in all 50 states. And I was, as I was prepping for this, I found some fascinating piece of research on the New America website, actually, that says that 0.05% of the federal budget goes to libraries. But on the inverse, libraries provide so much return on that investment. And I think as we look at the ways that libraries impact people's lives, that we're helping people get jobs, we're helping people meet other people, we're giving people safe spaces to gather, to deliberate, to be with their neighbors. We shouldn't be in this moment defunding or decreasing. We should actually be looking at how do we increase those resources and services. Um, and I think, certainly that's part of the conversation, sort of that funding, but we also have to have conversations about where that funding goes. Funding buildings is not the same as funding what happens inside of them. Of course, it's very easy to get money for construction, but a new building, a beautiful new building without library staff, without programming, without hours that meet the community needs, it really becomes a hollow promise. And so we have to make sure that not only as we are investing in the buildings themselves, we also have to invest in the people that really make the work happen.
Let me ask you a question. What's your first memory of going to a library?
Oh, wow. I, I have two memories. The first was my local school library, because my little town that I grew up in, we didn't have a library. So it was a school library, and the school librarian introduced me to a world of books that just really opened up my imagination, spark for me. My first memory of a public library was going 2 towns over to Leeds, Alabama, into a library branch that actually is still there right now. And in that library, not only did I see, books and comic books that really, sort of engaged me, it was the first place where I started to meet people who were very different from different parts of the city, but who actually had the same interests as me. So that idea for me, the library has always been a place that connects me to the other and not just to the.
Mhm. I'll share mine as well. Maybe not the first memory, but we moved around a lot when I was a child. And I remember a library in Coralville, Iowa, where we lived for a time, going to the public library where there were rows of books of children's biographies. And all of a sudden, that same sense of being able to walk through a book into the lives of someone else was very, very compelling. And the library made that possible. So let me ask you a question, a last question for now, until we open it up to the audience and see what's on their minds. Maybe there are people on this call who haven't recently walked into their local public library. Maybe they've gone to their university library or technical library, or maybe they've perused a library online. But what would you say to them? Why should they go now? And in addition to the library of things and the programming that you've mentioned, what will they find at a library now that they don't expect?
Mm, that's that's a great question. As I was working with the editors, our impression, we were trying to nail down a title for the book. Um, we had a number of options, but I recall the work that I often did in Memphis as I was, we were trying to renovate this library. We had some really cool things. If you're ever in Memphis, you should go check out the Casa Library in downtown Memphis. It has this really beautiful space. Now there's a cafe there, there's meeting rooms, there's an all new collection that's there, really beautiful seating and art. Recording spaces, and do audio projects, video projects, performing art spaces. And of course, that won't be the same for every library. But as I would, try to tell people this, and they would say, "Oh, like that doesn't sound like a library." I say, "Okay, well, hey, I want you to, meet me at the library tomorrow. We'll grab a coffee. I'll show you around, right?" As I showed them these, really amazing things, what I also showed them was the library's website. On the library's website, there were so many things that were there. There were databases that you could, do genealogy, research your family history. You could learn a new skill, a new hobby. You could get some assistance with taxes. You could do all sorts of things. There were these readers' guides of, like, hey, if you like this movie, you could check out this book, or if you like this album, you should check out this nonfiction book, right? Um, there was all these things that were on the library's website that people would say, "Oh, I didn't have any idea. I didn't know that was there." And I hear that time and time again. So I would encourage people to give a second look to the library. Start with, if you don't want to walk in the building just yet, start with the library's website. Browse around and see what's there. You might find something very interesting. But I can guarantee you this: when you do finally make your way into the library, you're going to find some really amazing librarians, library professionals, some of the most kind and gentle and amazing people that you will ever meet. You're going to find somebody who's going to be able to greet you, who's going to ask you questions, who's going to help you find exactly what you need. And there's a high likelihood that the next time you walk in there, they're going to remember. They may not remember your name, but they're going to remember some detail about that's going to make you feel welcome and special. And you're going to see other people there. You're going to see people that you may not have seen before, people that you might not have bumped into before. I think that's so important that we have these moments to interact and bump against people that we might not have done before. You're going to be able to do that in a unique way that the library offers. When you go to the library's website, you should check out some of the programs. You might be surprised at what the library does. Cooking classes, sewing classes, parenting classes, intergenerational opportunities. Just so many opportunities that are there for you that again you might have never even really considered that were in a public library.
You know, Shamichael, I think you've helped us to see that, especially if we haven't been in a library in a while, that there's been maybe a quiet revolution that's been going on as libraries have not become something different than they were before. They've always been this way, but expanded that sense of space, literally, and also intellectual space, and most importantly, maybe civic and community space. So we talk a lot about service design, delivery. It sounds like libraries have been doing that for some time, and that we are now in a place where we can all benefit from it. So yes, we will
For
meet you
sure.
at the library.
For sure.
You know, we've been taking a few questions over the course of the talk. So a couple of them are about resources and prioritization. So let me just start with the first question. One of our listeners says, there are high touch and high need users. I'm paraphrasing a bit. And then there are others who may come into a library and not know that they can actually go to the librarian and get help. How do you prioritize between those who know how to use the library or know something about libraries and what they offer, and those for whom it's a new experience? How do you divide your time if you're a library, if you're on staff at a library, the kind of resources that you offer, ebooks versus, additional terminals?
Yeah, I think that really is the beauty of the library professional. These folks are well equipped and often know how to do that. Often know how to multitask. But sometimes there are very high need situations. I'll give you an example. When I was in the Memphis Public Library System, there was a gentleman who came in and was looking for a job. He had been laid off, and he'd been working at this job for so long that the new job search felt overwhelming to him because in this new job search he had to apply online. He was not familiar with how to use a computer, and in order to apply online, he had to have an email account. He didn't have it, and he had to have a resume. He was just used to walking up to places and filling out an application on the spot, and none of these places were here. And it actually took me about 45 minutes to help this gentleman. Okay, we've got to create a resume. All right, we've got the resume done. Now we've got to go create an email address and show you how to use that, right? Throughout the whole time, like, okay, here's the keyboard, here's the mouse. It's very, very intensive things that are happening. And sometimes that you cannot get around that. That is just the nature of the library. That there are people who are coming in from all walks of life, and you have to be able to have the skills to be able to help those folks out. But I think again, when we think about libraries that are well designed, that are well maintained, that are well funded, right, and you've got proper staffing there, that's possible. And so I think again, as we're talking about these conversations around funding and around making sure that libraries have the resources that they need, we have to recognize that this is the sort of stuff that happens in libraries each and every day.
Mm-hmm. You make the point in your book that volunteers are important, but they can't close the gap, and so that external funding is crucial. Here's another question. This one's about programming in libraries. Some of the programming you've talked about to try to close some of the gaps that exist or bridge some of the polarization. A listener asked, have you seen any examples where efforts to create inclusive programming actually deepened local tensions? And if so, were there any lessons that you might or we might take away from that? So two questions there. Have you seen the more tensions that follow, additional tensions that follow? And if so, what are the lessons? And if you haven't, that's good news too.
Yeah, I haven't seen situations where tensions deepen. That might be a really great sort of next research project for me. What I've seen, particularly as we think about conversations, right? And bringing people together to have conversations about what we might call difficult topics. What I've seen that makes those work are a couple of things. That often, as often as you can focus on the local and not the national, you've got something happening. Number two, that you have to either make sure library staffers are really well trained, or you've got to bring in great partners. And I think particularly in that space, where I am seeing is libraries are doing an incredible job of bringing in partners. So when I think about folks like the people at Essential Partners, Everyday Democracy, or Living Room Conversation, these folks are, each and every year training numbers. I think the Kettering Foundation also does incredible work here of training librarians on how to actually have those conversations. And some of those ground rules of, okay, hey, we're going to engage in active listening. If you're here, we're going to speak from first person. We're not going to be bringing in narratives from a best friend or from what grandma said. Like, we're going to be, we're going to do this. We're going to respect people's voices, right? We're going to give everybody a chance to say something. And when you put those ground rules in place, it really does, I think, create an opportunity for really great conversation to happen. Now, where I think the opportunity lies is that what happens after these conversations, when you've had people that have, come and sat down and talked about a difficult topic or talked about a local topic, local issue. What's the next step for them? How do you translate that into local action? How do you translate that into continued relationships? Libraries can only go so far in that space, but I think they are doing an incredible work.
Mm-hmm. Our colleague Holly Rusin-Gilman does a lot of work on citizen assemblies, as Mark mentioned. And you said here just a moment ago that it's important, maybe a lesson, is to focus on the local and not the national issues. Can you say a little more about that, of why that might be a first step in bringing communities together that are at odds with one another?
Yeah, well, I think it gives people an opportunity to perhaps move into a shared project, right? So one of the libraries that I cover in my book, Salt Lake County Library, has this program called Let's Be Neighbors, where they do exactly that. They highlight a local issue. They source a number of people, in the community, whether it's researchers, nonprofit leaders, just various people who have knowledge in that area. They bring them into a space where they share that information about what's happening locally. They give people opportunities to ask questions. And from that, opportunities can arise, right? And when you think about when you're able to drill in on a hyper local level, you can talk about education, you can talk about water access, you can talk about economic development, right? And actually give people something that they could put their hands to that may be a little more tangible than sort of the national issues, which might not, we might not be able to touch it in some certain communities.
So we might have opinions about the national issues, but many of us are more likely to be able to intervene and engage and do something, if you will, locally, especially if it's something that they see their neighbors, their new neighbors, engaged with and caring about as well. Yeah.
Exactly.
So we talked earlier about a library user who needed to learn how to use the computer and the mouse to create a resume and apply for a job online. Another of our listeners has a question about another kind of community. The community is young men. And this listener is interested in what is referred to here as the male loneliness crisis. And there's been a lot of attention to the struggles of boys and young men for some time. But the question is, or the observation is that on a recent trip to the library, the listener says, I noticed that there were boys there playing all alone on their computers. Now, I think you've already addressed this earlier, but maybe you can come back to it. There's that doing something by yourself, but in the community of others. Can you say a little bit more about programming for boys, or how to bring boys and girls, for that matter, away from the screen and into community?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I imagine that probably what that person saw someone playing was probably Roblox, which is the game that young men play when they come into the library. They want to hop on and play that game, and a couple of things. Number one, I'm glad that they felt they could come to the library, right? Anytime I saw young men, particularly young Black men, come into the library, I was just happy that they were there. Because if they were there, I could engage them in other ways, right? But also recognizing that, hey, gaming was one part of what these young men did. And they often do that particular game is actually done in a very social setting online, right? That they're doing that. Sometimes they're sitting across from someone else who's also playing the game and sort of competing with each other. And it might not have come across that way as you're looking from the outside, but if they're sitting next to someone, often they're trying to see who can get to a certain place the fastest, the quickest, and that sort of thing. But beyond that, then you then have an opportunity to engage folks, right? Because one of the programs that I would love to do, one of the conversations I would love to have with men when I saw them doing that, would say, "Hey, you seem to really, really like this game. What if I could show you how to build that game on your own? What if I could what if I could show you some very basic levels of computational thinking and coding, right? So that you could create those things." And there are, through, I think, particularly think about sort of the Google CS First campaign and other platforms like that, where you can sort of take where a kid's interest is and then help them sort of translate their interest into what might be a possible career. So again, for us, the sort of a natural place was to go into coding, was to go into storytelling, was to go into character creation and world building. These are things that you can leverage because you know that interest is actually there.
Let me put two questions together as maybe our final questions. They're quite different, but it may be helpful to consider them together. The first is a tough one. What is the role of libraries in communities with large unhoused populations? And then the second question, which in a way is related, is what are the methods that libraries can use to better understand the needs of users better? This listener notes that in the listener's experience, libraries seem to focus on resources or materials and less on people. Now, that's maybe a perception, and you've been talking ways in which that isn't the case in other communities. But let me just put those two big picture questions in front of you as we close out this part of the conversation.
Yeah, this is an issue that I came to be very passionate about. The library branch that I was working in was frequented. I would say perhaps at the time before our renovation, perhaps our largest customer base were unhoused individuals. And as I would go out and do community outreach and talk to other folks in the community who were not using the library, it was almost the first thing that always came up.
Hmm.
And so one of the things that I had to do and that my team that we had to do was to really lean into combating the stereotype, right? That I think sometimes when we think about unhoused individuals, our mind immediately goes to mental health, our mind immediately goes to drug abuse. But there's so many other things that are at place.
For sure.
We have to talk about the housing crisis. We have to talk about, veterans and quality and access of care. And so I think it's important for us to not put those people into to lump those individuals into this one sort of stereotypical category. Not saying that person that you asked the question did that, but it's just something that I sort of had to think about and talked about. The other thing that I had to do was when I did have these individuals come to the library, one of the things that we would do, Kimberly, is I would, at the end of the library tour, I would walk them out of the library and I say, I want you to look in any direction, to the north, to the south, to the west, 6, 7 blocks down the road, and you tell me where else in this downtown neighborhood can these folks go? Where else could they go and get something to eat? Where could they go and use the restroom? Where could they go and seek shelter? There was nowhere else, right? And so the library, in some ways, was becoming the sole responsibility, sort of the sole care of an issue that was a societal problem. This wasn't a library problem. This was a society problem. Yet the library was sort of having to deal with it, right? And so I do like to put that context out there because I think sometimes people think, oh, well, what are you going to do about the library? What are you going to do about the homeless issue? What are you going to do about the unhoused issue? It's like, okay, well, there's only so much we can do. But what I think, what I see libraries do very well, actually, number one, is provide these people a level of dignity,
Yes.
of knowing their name, of knowing their story, of doing their very best to connect them with resources, connect them with service providers, right? Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. These people do have their own agency, right? And so you can't force someone to go to a shelter. You can't force someone to go. But what you give people dignity, when you give people, when you come from a position that says you are not a problem to solve, you are a person to love, a person to serve, just like anybody else who comes to this library, then that opens up the potential to be able to intervene and to do things. But again, as I said earlier, so much of this does, I think, come down to one, partnerships. And I think libraries do an amazing job of this. I think about the LA County Library, the LA Public Library, Seattle Public Library, Denver Public Library. These folks are doing incredible work right now around serving the unhoused community. And I think there are examples that we can follow. But then I think beyond that, as I said earlier, that we must begin to at a policy level and at a governance level, begin to bring the library into these conversations about this, and not say, it is often a library last, library not a part of the conversation, library now just kind of has to deal with it. But when you bring libraries into that conversation at the very beginning, when you're trying to develop interventions, then we can get to a place where I think we can really make some things happen.
Mm. So you've helped us to see that not only are libraries repositories of knowledge and solutioning, but they also capture some of the questions and challenges that our communities are grappling with in their very spaces and places. So thank you for this wonderful conversation, Michael. Is there any last closing word that you would like to make or call to the listeners? The floor is yours, and then I'll say a word, and then we'll invite Holly on as well.
Well, again, I just want to say thank you so much for having me, to the New American team, to you, Kimberly, for being in conversation with me. And meet me at the library. I write that libraries aren't just places where people check out books. They are places where we actually go to check in with each other. And in a time marked by so much disconnection, distrust, and division, libraries truly remain the last civic spaces where people can show up without transaction, without a filter, and just be seen and be supported, and sometimes just be. And those spaces are important, but those spaces don't just happen by accident. It takes intention. It takes investment. It takes all of us, neighbors, policymakers, civic actors, choosing to protect and expand those spaces where democracy still lives and breathes. So my invitation to you beyond this is, let's meet each other there. Let's meet at the library. I believe that the public library, regardless of if you have used the space recently or not, the very fact that the library is in your community makes your community better. And I hope that we all will walk away with that thought.
I love the invitation for us to meet one another in the library. It's clear to me that from your book and our conversation today, that the civic commons is not something that we inherit. It's something we have to build and sustain together. And so I guess my closing comment in response to yours is that, these places, libraries, and all that they enable won't protect themselves. They depend on our participation, our imagination, and sometimes our defense. So I guess my call would be, coming from more of a policy space and an academic space as well, is that wherever you sit, if you've been listening to this conversation, or if you'll listen to it in the future, wherever you sit, policy, philanthropy, education, everyday life, consider this question: what am I doing, and what can I do to invest in the shared spaces where democracy is lived? And with that, let me turn it over to Holly.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. Just a big round of virtual applause to Kim and Shamichael. The book is excellent. I urge you all to get it at the library, buy it, bring it to the library. It's fantastic. And I just want to thank also Mark Schmidt, Sarah Jacob, Emily Winchester, the whole team at New America, and all of you in the interwebs. These are such thoughtful questions. And I think it really underscores how much we need these spaces now more than ever. And I think about the quote, the librarians are the original search engines, and how we really need to sort of have places to meet, spaces to bring people together, to have those opportunities to bring people together across lines of difference, to collectively problem solve and to have fun. When I think about the space that libraries create for a Mahjong night, for a Meet the Author, and the vital services, as we've also mentioned as well, there's so many dual roles. And that's one of the values and the beauties of public spaces, right? Making them inclusive for everyone. And how do we really tap into that spirit? And we're so thankful to all of you for joining. And there was a lot of interest in this event. And I think that speaks to the demand in this moment. And I loved the final remarks from our speakers. This is something we have to keep and we have to be working on diligently together. And it cuts across rural, urban, all of these places. Libraries belong to each of us. And there really is this sense of community ownership that we need to be envisioning. So I just want to say thank you and really look forward to continuing the conversation. And it is a fantastic read. Highly recommend that everyone read it. So with that, thank you so much for joining us.